With the help of Hashem, we are learning Shabbos Daf Mem Zayin. This is the last Daf in Masechtas Kira. Firstly, we're going to continue to learn the sugya of buses. We're going to learn about the dispensation that Chazal gave when it comes to muksa. When we have an item that we call a graf shel re'i, literally that means a chamber pot. Meaning, if there's something out in the open that's disgusting, even though because of it being muksa, one would not be allowed to be metaltal it, but Chazal allows us to remove it. For example, in our homes, you have in your kitchen, you can have a large garbage bag. When it fills up on Shabbos, you are allowed to take it outside. Think about it. Garbage, there's no greater muksa than it. It has no inherent value. It's garbage. Yet, if it's in a location where it's going to cause a lot of unpleasantness, then Chazal allow us, because of it being a graf shel re'i, literally it means they didn't have running water. What they had for their restrooms was they had in their rooms, they had a chamber pot. And yes, and it's something very unpleasant. And even though it should have been muksa, it is theoretically like muksa, but it's not midrabanan asur to be maktsiya. You are allowed to move it out. We're going to learn more again about buses. We mentioned this already a few times. Bekitzer, that if something is a base both to a davar ha'asr and to a davar ha'muter, it will be allowed to be moved, but there has to be a certain type of chashivus in the davar ha'muter. Now, whether that chashivus is a financial chashivus, or whether that chashivus, when we gave an example a couple of days ago, that many people put on their tray, upon which they have the leichters on the table. So they're not going to put, some people are going to put a challah. You can argue challah doesn't have that much value, but it does have value because it's a kavod Shabbos. For Shabbos, you have to have like a Mishnah. Certainly, if you put a chitas, if you put a sefer, it doesn't bother me that miraculously svarim are very inexpensive. But a sefer, what's more chashuv than a sefer? In other words, the davar hamuter, as we'll see, has to have chashivus, and then indeed that's going to be of tremendous help. We're going to go back to a sugya that we have on Daf Mem Vav regarding reassembling kalim. Now, we spoke about in the last Daf reassembling a menorah. We're speaking about certain utensils that were made to be disassembled and reassembled. And the issue is, ein binyan bekalim. And actually, Rashi, as we'll speak out here again, goes mamish strong. Ein binyan bekalim. It's a very lenient opinion. So what would be the problem of, let's say, if you have a candelabra? As you know, many candelabras have the option. You can have one candle, one lamp on the top, and if you want, you can attach arms to it, and you can add, 4 additional arms. So we know that we are not allowed to reassemble such a candelabra on Shabbos. Rashi considers this to be connected to the malacha of makeh b'patish. Other Rishonim argue with Rashi, and they don't say categorically that there is never ein binyan b'kelim. Anyways, this is going to be one of the topics that we'll learn about today. We're going to learn about Binyan Minhatsad. Binyan Minhatsad in our context is if you have something that was made to be disassembled and reassembled. And when it's reassembled, it's only reassembled loosely with no nails. That's called Binyan Minhatsad. We'll see whether that's permitted or not. And in the final Mishnah in the Perek on Daf Mem Zayin Amud Beis, we're going to learn, number one, that one is allowed to place, even on Shabbos, a keli under a lamp, not to receive the oil that we learned about before, but just in case a spark will fly out of the lamp, you want to, so to say, capture the spark. Mevatel keli mehechane. So that's the ground zero. A spark doesn't have mamashos, so therefore it's not considered problematic even when it's in the keli. And the final din in the Mishnah regarding, let's say, indirect machaba, which is a big topic. We mentioned already a few times that any of the malachas, if we do it indirectly, we are only being gram kibui. It's called, I think in English, causality or causality. So then the halacha will be that it's only us and midrabanan. We're not allowed to do it, but only on a rabbinic level. And whenever there's financial laws, Chachamim hold, it won't even be us and midrabanan. Just to give a great example, we'll have this later in a Mishnah. If there's a fire that's burning somewhere, and you see that the fire appears to be going in the direction of your home, we're speaking about in a case where there's no issue of carrying it because there's an eruv, you're in a chutzner. Can you set up barrels of water? You're creating a firewall. You're not building anything. You're not schlepping it in a way that you're making a a furrow in the ground. You're just making a firewall. Now, maybe when the fire hits these barrels, the heat of the fire will make the barrels crack, and the water will pull it out. So again, doing that, max is indirect because you didn't put the fire out directly. You did something now which could cause the fire, or even if it will cause the fire later to go out. Normally, that's also midrabanan, but here you're doing it to prevent loss. There's a machlokes tanoim, the chachamim hold, because of loss, it's mutar lechatchila, and a lot more. Chevra, let us start on Daf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. We left off on the second line from the top of the Amud. Let's not forget that on Daf Mem Hey Amud Beis, even though we said at the end that there was two opinions, but we did have the final shita quoting Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef came from the Holy Land, and he said that Rabbi Yochanan holds halachic Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to muktzah. So let's go now with that approach. So says the Gemara, Amar Rab Zera, Amar Rabase, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Amar Rabbi Rumnus. I mean, that's called the Oimer Davar B'Shem Oimer. We're getting everyone on the line. So Rabbi Rumnus, going back to the origin, says that Li hitir Rebbe allowed for me letaltel machta be'efra, to move a censer along with the leftover ashes. Was is thus a censer? A censer is a keli in which you burn incense. Now, ashes, are they muksa or are they not muksa? Really, as we'll see, it depends. It depends what the person had in mind prior to Shabbos for the ashes. If you wanted to keep those ashes and to use them to cover something dirty, ashes will not be muksa, but right now we're going with the Havamina that normally without such previous designation, ashes have no value, therefore they are muksa. So if you want to be metaltal the machta, now what's the machta? A keli? I don't know if this shovel is the right picture, but any keli, could be it is. No, it's not the right example, because this machta, if I'm not mistaken, had a cover to it. We'll see in a moment. A keli that's meant to burn incense is called a keli shemalachto le'isid, because since you may not burn anything on Shabbos, so it's called a keli made to do something prohibited. And by the way, keli shemalachto le'isid is one of the most lenient categories of muksa. You can move it. Let's say that gufay umakoymay. If we're going to go with the approach that ash has no inherent value if it wasn't pre-designated to use to cover something unclean, then ash is, that's a much bigger muksa. Then you can't move it at all. Oh, so that's a big heter. No, it's the machta, based on it being a keli shemalachta le'isid, you can't move it just to move it. But if you need where it's laying, if you need its place, then you can move it. And we already mentioned, once you pick up muksa in your hand, l'kula alma ba'ofen hamuter, then you can put it down wherever you want. The chiddush here is that even though the machta is a basis to something that may not be moved, even l'tzorech gufay, l'tzorech mekaymai, but the machta is.
And it has ashes inside?
And it has ashes inside. Now that's a big chiddush. Question is, why indeed will you be allowed? We're just learning the dinim of basis. We just concluded that the reason why Rab Shimon does not allow you to move the lamp while it's burning is not because Shema Yechabe, that was Gavaldik, because Rab Shimon L'shitase holds Davar She'ein Mischaven is muter. So who cares if accidentally Yechabe? Nothing happened. It's only because it's a basis, but nevertheless, Rebbe told Rebbe Rubnis that you can move the machta, you can move the censer with the ashes. Let's read inside the Rashi. Amar Rav Rubnis lihit Rebbe l'taltal machta. Shalavoina. The machta was used to burn frankincense, for example. Kosalka daitach. Right, the Havamina is be'afra im afra ka'amar. Who just said that? No, the Havamina is that even though there's ashes inside, and number two, the Havamina is that sheha efer muktzeh. Why? That's a very important line, because if you have ashes, today we're living in a whole different world. But then one of the options that people would use to cover something unclean would be to use ashes. If such ashes were pre-designated prior to Shabbos, they would also not be muktzeh. And Vashmeinan, the agav machta, since it's in the machta, the ikatoiras keli yolel. Now, I know it's a keli shemalachta le'isid, but at least it's a keli. Anything that's already categorized as a keli is already less problematic. And by the way, keli shemalachta le'isid, you can't stam move. But you can move it because, for example, you need its place. So the Rebbe was matir, even though there's ashes in it. This came through the chain, through Rabbi Yechanan, me, Amar Rabbi Yechanan Hachi, especially since, again, Rabbi Yechanan, we're going to go with the approach Paskins, L'chumra, right? Like, because you can argue that maybe according to Rab Shimon, the Ephra is not Muksa. You didn't pre-designate it. That's the whole sugi we learned 2 daf ago. It's very difficult to make Muksa according to Rab Shimon. You can find Epsaheter, you have to be Matzia, be a Dayim, etc. Both things, you have to separate it, and it doesn't have inherent value. According to Rab Shimon, the ashes don't have inherent value if you didn't designate it to cover something, but you were not Matzia, be a Dayim. No, but since it came through Rabbi Yechanan, that's the link over here, and we're going with the approach that this has to follow Rabbi Yehuda, who's more machmer. We learned today. We're going to learn in the Mishnah later in Shabbos. Evan also is something that's not even a keli. It's not a keli. Now, what happens if you have a child that's holding a stone? Now, the Gemara later is going to say it's not stam, that it's a child that's very clingy with the father. And we take that into account. So when you need to, you can pick up your son. I can pick up my son, even though indirectly I'm moving the Evan. The question won't be from the case, it will be from the next case. Oi kalkala, or a person is allowed to pick up a basket, even though there's a stone in it. Now this is a bona fide muktzah, because the muktzah, the Evan is resting in the basket, and for that, now we just learned. Buses, l'davar ha'asur, becomes asur. An Evan may not be moved. And therefore, it must be bekalkala malaya peiros askiden. That's the concept, like we mentioned in the intro. True, there's an Evan, but since there are also peiros, and what's going to be key is that the peiros are at least as chashuv, obviously here, much more. It has more value than the Evan. So now the kalkolas are buses, both l'davar amuter and to a davar asur. That's why the Mishnah says you can move it. In other words, tamad is paid only because there's something that is movable. Leslie paid. Faket Rabbi Yechanan made it clear. Loi. So why are you allowed to move a machta, a censer, that shovel that Kavan showed, with ashes? It's a buses only the davar asur pashat akashem. So indeed, ishtoimim kechadashata, according just from a pasuk in the Nil, he was confounded. In other words, that's a good rule in life. Here, a good question. You don't have to answer right away. If you know the answer, answer. If you don't know the answer, wait. And after he got his composure back, va'aman, and he says it must be that what was the case of Rebbe Rumnes hachinami de isbei kartin. So the Rashi gave, that's why Rashi gave the example of frankincense. So frankincense itself is burnt. I don't know if you ever saw them. No, I have liquid frankincense, but they come in granules. And we're going to learn in Kachim about part of the mitzvah on many korbanos, beginning with the mincha. The lechem apanim was also to offer levaina, the granules. If all of them would have been burnt, you only have aphid, you have a basas l'davar ha'asur, then you would not be allowed to move it. It must be that the censer also had in it the unburned frankincense. Oh, and therefore it becomes a basis for a davar hamutar as well.
Why is that mutar?
Oh, frankincense, because it's not ashes.
So you have to burn it.
Doesn't matter. No, you don't have to burn it. It has a good fragrance. It has a good fragrance. Now the problem is like this. Again, you have to know the reality of how things used to be. When you have in your shelf frankincense, nice. Okay, that's something that has a good fragrance. Once it's in a machta, once it's in this censer, and it's partially burnt, it doesn't matter the quantity. Does the remaining karten have chashivus? It really depends on whether you're wealthy or whether you're poor. And if a person is wealthy, it's already considered something insignificant. It still has a good fragrance. That's the nakuda, that for you to say it's a basis for both isur and heter, the heter has to have some chashivus. So the problem is, who gave the heter? Rebbe. He gave it to Rebbe Rumnes, but Rebbe gave the heter. Rebbe was very wealthy. Rebbe was the ultimate Torah of a gedula b'markamecha. Kartin bei Rebbe michashivi. Since Rebbe was that wealthy, and therefore for him, he would never smell that frankincense because it's in the machto with ashes, so it's not considered a basis l'davar hamuter. And if you're going to say v'chitema, since other people, not Rebbe, but others would make use of it, and since it's chazu la'aniyim, so for even the ashir, it's considered something significant enough to be matter moving the censer. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. And we're jumping me'inyan la'inyan, going from basis l'davar hamuter and iser to a din in tuman tara. And we had this already a lot. We had this in Masechta Shabbos, that there are certain garments that are so insignificant that halachically they're not considered a beged. Pieces of cloth are not considered a beged, and therefore they're not even susceptible to becoming tummy. That's a leniency. Now there are certain patches or pieces of cloth that an ani would use and an usher wouldn't. And clearly we differentiate. We don't say that since it's chazul aniyim, so therefore it has a status of a beged for everyone. We don't do that. We learned in the Braisa, bigdi aniyim, takel aniyim. Means if you have a little garment that an ani would make use of, for the ani, this lachumra, for the ani, it's considered a beged and it's susceptible. Bigdi ashirim, that is going to become susceptible to becoming tummy for the ashirim. No, guys, bigdi ashirim is for sure susceptible for the aniyim. The point of the Braisa is not the other way around. Avol the aniyim la ashirim loy. And based on that premise, we're not going to accept that since karten are used by aniyim, so therefore even for Bei Rebbe, it's considered something of significance. So Ella Abaye gives another approach. And these are big topics. Ella Abaye, Mida Dahava, the reason why Rebbe was mated to Rebbe Rumnus to move the censer, it's like a chamber pot. Now you have to understand that a chamber pot looks disgusting. A chamber pot has a bad odor. This is already a stretch. And we're not living in the world where people would have these censers filled with ashes. Doesn't smell so bad. And we'll see in a moment it was covered. There's going to be a lot of pushback toward it. Now, if it is considered like a chamber pot, like we spoke out in the intro, that you can mamish move muksa, if it's disgusting and you have to get it out of this environment. And again, once you pick it up, like if I can take out the garbage bag from my kitchen, that's the rule. L'kula alma, once it entered my hand beheted, it's not like when I left my kitchen, I got to drop it. Then I can take it to wherever I need to take it further away. Omar Rava against this chaver, shtei tshuvas b'davar. Tshuvas means kashas here. I have two refutations against you, two challenges against you. Number one, chada graf shel re'i mo'is v'haylei mo'is. Now you can counter back. Faket, we just said Rebbe was an usher. The whole idea of something being repugnant is also relative. No, it's for Abaye, at least in the perspective of someone very wealthy, having such a struggle with ashes, even if there's some granules unburnt. But okay, but Rava says Sanich. And number two, graf shel re'i only has a din if and when it's megale, when it's uncovered. That's why it's called a graf. It's not pleasant. But v'hai mechase, this type of censer, unlike Kavan's picture, would have a cover. In other words, he didn't accept that this is graf. You can't make anything and everything into a graf shel re'i. So Elo Amarava ki avinan bei Rav Nachman. When I was in the household of Rav Nachman, have a metal telinon kanuna. Kanuna is some sort of portable heater. It's also like a pan with coals. Okay, and here also the coals and the dirt, if designated to use to cover dirt, is not muksa. They allowed to move this kanuna. Agav kitma. Now the keli, the kanuna, this movable pan. It's like a movable heater. It's a keli shemalach le'iser. Faket. We allowed it to move it with the kitma because there the kitma was designated prior to Shabbos to cover dirt. So if a child, they made dirt in the house, they made use of the remains in the kanuna. So first of all, ash if it was pre-designated prior to Shabbos to use for something that you can use it for Shabbos, it's not muksa. So first of all, fakir, here there's nothing muksa. The problem is that now we got a picture that in the kanuna, afagav the ikraleo shivrei eitzim, they would put wood chips, they would put pieces of wood to burn. It was a portable heater. Now the shivrei eitzim is muksa. His point is that here you have an item that is a basis, l'davar muter, which is the ashes now, fakir, it flipped. Even though it also has in it muksa, you are allowed to move it because it's also a basis, l'davar muter. It must be in the case of Rabbi Avraham, the ashes that were in there were pre-designated to be used to cover dirt. Meisvei asks the Gemara on this approach. We learned in Abraisa, Vishavin, now this Vishavin is going back to Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon regarding moving a lamp on Shabbos. Rab Shimon, we had in the Mishnah the most lenient of opinions, Rabbi Yehuda the most chomer opinions, right? So says the Braisa, She'im yesh ba shivrei psilam, that if you have the remnants of wicks in it, she'asa l'taltel, that you can't move it, even though the oil is something usable, you can't move it because of the wicks. In other words, the Gemara is challenging this whole premise that if something is a basis, both to something permissible and to something forbidden, you can move the basis. Why? According to Rab Shimon, that after the lamp goes out, you can move the oil. But if you have pieces of wick that's still usable, and that's muksa, because you can't light a fire on Shabbos, then you can't move it. Why not? It's also a basis to the oil. Answers the Gemara, Amar Abaye, that Braisa was mentioned, the Galila, Galil, the Galil then was an area where it was very difficult to get wicks, whether it is because they made wicks from flax and they had a shortage of flax, and therefore the little pieces of wick was considered substantially more chashuv than the remnant oil. And that's going to be key. Masha'enkein over here must be that the kartin, that the ashes are chashuv. You need to cover dirt, even though you might have in it noch shivrei something that's not usable. Okay, says the Gemara. Levi bar Shmuel Ashkachinu, he found to both the Amoraim Rab Abba and Afuna bar Chia. The Abba Kaimu Apischa the Bei Rafuna. They were standing at the door entrance of Rafuna, and Amar Lohu. So Levi bar Shmuel told both Rab Abba and Rafuna bar Chia. Now we're going back to the sugya that we had on Daf Mem Vav regarding reassembling utensils. Binyan Bekalim, Makaba Patash will speak it out in a moment. So he asked them, Coppersmiths would regularly carry along with them a certain type of what they called a bed. They would travel a lot. And this is a bed that was made to be disassembled and made to be reassembled. And when you would reassemble it, number one, you wouldn't use nails or screws, which would make it permanent. And it was only reassembled loosely. Again, how do you define this? I don't know. It was not tight. Okay? So therefore, there was a tzata thing that since it's made to disassemble, to reassemble, and even when you reassemble it, it's not something tight. Can you do it on Shabbos or not? Amalei. Now listen, so these two Amoraim, this is going to be a machlokes, which is rare. Menakotza elakotza. Normally on Shabbos, you have the three levels, right? Chayv chatas, pater al aser, muter. So when you have an argument, like Rabbi Yehuda, Rab Shimon, Chayev Pater or Pater Muter. Here it's Menakotza Lakotza. These two Amoraim says Muter, not a problem at all, permitted. However, also the comment of Rabbi Yehuda, this Rabbi Yehuda told Levi bar Shmuel. Wow, I'm surprised to hear they told you that, because Rav and Shmuel to Amri Tarvayu Hamachzer Mita Shal Tarsim b'Shabbos. Not only is it not Muter, it's not. The problem is not even rabbinic. You're chayev achatos. Chayev chatos. So look inside Rashi, 4 lines under the Gemara. Why? Because you made a keli. In other words, you assembled a bed. And what's the issue? So you can say, what's the issue? You binyan. No. So that's Rashi is the one, the Rishon, that leads this approach. That ein binyan bekelim is a hard and fast rule. We don't change that. Guys, this is very halacha l'maisa, putting together a box. You have to take the folding boxes and you build it up. Rashi holds never binyan b'kelim. So what's the chayiv chatos? The chayiv v'shumaka b'patish, which is an av l'chol goyim melacha v'loy mishum binyan. They ain't binyan b'kelim. And over here, the Ramban and other Rishonim argue with Rashi, and they take it. Everyone holds that to a certain level ain't binyan b'kelim. But in a case where you have a completely disassembled bed and you're putting it together, then fakert, he understands chayv chatas because of binyan. Anyway, that's what we're going to follow Shitas Rashi.
The Makin Patish applies in this case, even though there are, the literal term, there are no nails.
That's the whole chiddush. The chiddush is that not only is there no nail, more than that, when you put that together, it was done loosely. This loosely will be a very important halachic concept. So hold on. So we have now Machloikas Amiroim. The Gemara Meitzvei. Now Meitzvei is going to be on the two Amiroim that were very lenient. It says in a Brayso, Hamachzir Kenei Menoira B'Shabbos. If you have a candelabra and on Shabbos you attach to it one of its branches. Again, this was lechatchila built in a way that you can disassemble it, you can reassemble it. And there the Brayso says you reassemble it on Shabbos. You're chayiv chatas. Knei sayodin is when you plaster a building now. So how they had this pole, and you got to put plaster on the lower part of the wall and the higher part of the wall. So it was a pole that had many pieces, and the plasterers would constantly attach pieces. They would make the pole longer, so the end of the pole where they had the plaster was higher. Then they would take off again. It was something that you constantly put together and took apart. So putting together the pole of the plasters. So here says the Brayso lo yachzer, but the imichzer pater avol asur, pater avol asur. So what's the problem? The problem here is, let's go back to first in the Brayso. Rabbi Simoi, who's a Tana, Oimer Keren Agula Chayev, another similar case. Keren Agula Zakt Rashi, you have a certain type of musical instrument that had in it many perforations, many holes, through which you would put another halal, you would put another a reed. So when you blow out, it would manipulate the sounds of the voice, the pleasantness of it. So if it's a Keren Agula, in other words, Rashi says that in order to put the reed into the holes, that's the key. Only a professional can do it. It's called the Maisa Uman. Let's go all with Rashi. That's a bona fide makabah patish. And when you put it in there, it's strongly affixed, says Rashi. Then is when you chayiv. By Kerem Pshuta, anyone can do it. And when you stick the head again, it's a musical instrument. It was a straight instrument. Today, you have flutes and you just cover your finger. There were holes and they would add pieces, they would take out pieces. Since it's not something that demands a professional, and when you put something in and take it out, it's loose, that's mamash like our case. So the Brayso says that the potter means you're not chayv chatas. By the menorah, it's very strong, but it's not muter. In other words, I get it that it shouldn't be a chayv midoraisa, but you have a Brayso that clearly writes that it's also midrabanan, and indeed, there's no way out of this. Now, is this a kasha on the other shita that you chayv chatas? Also not, because I don't know how you define tight and loose. They can say fakert, they can say that the mita shel tarsim is like the kenei hamanoyim. But no one holds, even when it's loose, no one is going to say that it's completely permitted. And takazoi, the only solution for the other Amiroim is to find another Brayso, Machlokes Tanoim, and they can take the other side. Answers the Gemara Inu, says we're talking about Rabbi Abba, right? Rabbi Abba and Abhuna Bar Chia is the Amar Kahaitano. They have another Brayso. Did Tanya, second to last lines. Labnei Samita, bet sockets. Bet sockets was people did not have the types of floors in the homes that we have today. It was earthen floors. Now, the disadvantage of an earthen floor is that it's moist, especially when it's during the raining season. The beds and the legs of the beds were made out of wood and moisture is not the best shidduch. It's a matter of time for it to get rotten, for it to get swollen. So they would have these sockets that they would place under the beds. Again, these are items that were meant to put on when they were not needed. They were meant to put off. You don't need a professional. It was done loosely. So the Brayso says that melabnoi samita, bed sockets. V'karoi samita, many beds were built in a way that the legs easily were put in, they came out. Or ulavachim shal sekibis. Ulavachim shal sekibis is when you have a crossbow and you want to shoot an arrow, we groisim evinim, so they would put a certain nut that would help you direct the arrow. That's the levachim shal sekibis. All of these items are items that you don't need it's not a Maisa Uman. It was meant from the beginning. It's like this bed of the coppersmith's bed. It was meant to take apart, to put it together. When you do it, it's done loosely. Oh, so hold on. So here the Braisa says lo yachsir, but the imichsir pater daf mem zayin omid beis avo about oh, I'm sorry. So all of these things, fakir, all of these things are put strongly. All of these things are affixed strongly. However, v'lo yiska lechatchila, don't do it. Look inside the top Rashi. That's the word. Lo yiska b'choizik. No. You may not do it with nails. Lo yiska b'choizik ali de yiseidos. In other words, if you're affixing it with a peg, then you're not allowed to do it. If you're not affixing it with the peg, if you did it with the peg, imtaka with the peg, chayv chatos. Now again, that's the big question. Chayv chatos l'ramban. Sometimes you'll say because of binyan, even though it's a keli. Rashi consistent. Makaba patish. That's taka, like you said. That's called a makaba patish. You put a peg in it. Oh, here we go. It depends. It depends. However, good luck to you. Once you can say that it's a fixation is done loosely, it takes it down a notch. It's not even awesome with the Rabbanan, it's completely permissible. In other words, Rab Abba and Abuna Bar Chia are going to consider the Mita Shal Tarsiim something that's called Rafui, and they simply paskent like the Rashbag. Gavaldik. Rashbag in the Mishnah, Kol Mokim that Rashbag is learned in the Mishnah. Halacha Kemoisai Chutz from the three cases. So even though this is a Braisa, and some people say that we only paskin always like him when he's in a Mishnah, not in a Braisa, but Gavaldik, they have Umtalina. Says the Gemara story, Bei Rev Chama. In the household of Rav Chama, have a mita, there was a bed that's called a mita Gilal Nisa. The mita Gilal Nisa was similar, obviously, to the coppersmith's beds. In other words, it was a typical bed that they made in the Galil. Point is, it was a piece of furniture that had sections, had parts, and they would take it apart, they would put it together. By the way, that's not like a folding chair. A folding chair, you don't even take apart. Folding chair is always together, just one position or in another position. Here, you took it apart, you put it together, and Hava Mahadri Baby Yom Tov. They would assemble it on Yontif. They're same pushback. Omar Lei Hahumed Rabbanan L'Rava My Daitach. When I heard about what they did in Deichama, why do you think it's allowed? I mean, the problem is, again, I get that it's loose, and I get that it's not Meiser Uman, and therefore it's called Binyan Minhatsad. Nevertheless, so Taka Binyan Minhatsad side building, Nehi the Isur de Raisalek. I get it that you're not going to be Chayiv Chatos, but don't we know that Isurim and the Rabbanan Niya Ika, and there in Beichama, they did it. They put the bed together, they took a bed apart. So Amarlei, same answer. He knew already the Braisa that we just quoted on top of the Amid, that Ano, they attacked Rava. Rava was involved in. Ano Kedash, or we Paskan like Rabban, Shimon and Gamliel, the Amar, the Braisa we had on top, Imayarafoi, Mutter, and therefore Lachatchila, you are allowed to do it. Gavaldik going on to the last Mishnah in Perekira. So we're going back to the lamp. So all the sugi began many daf ago. The question is whether you can put a keli under a lamp on Shabbos. Why would they do it? Because they needed every drop of oil. And sometimes some oil spritzes out of the lamp. You want to capture the oil. That was the topic that we learned that you may not do. In contrast, noisnen kli tachas haner. You can put a keli under the ner. Now, guys, it's very important just to get the flow in the Gemara that here we're not speaking. We're speaking both Erev Shabbos and on Shabbos. Even on Shabbos, it's important to emphasize that to Chab. Whether it's before Shabbos, whether it's on Shabbos, to be mekabeled in its tzotzis. In other words, if there is a fear that some sparks are going to fly out of the lamp, and today we have good fuel. The whole second Pedic was about what should you use to light. If you're using good oil and good the wicks, no spark should happen. But sometimes, even though they use things that were obviously muted halachically to use for, later Shabbos Kodesh, there's a spark. You're afraid of sparks. You're putting this to chop the sparks. It's allowed. Big question is, again, remember the whole problem is, you're not allowed to be mevatel a keli mehichonei, which means you cannot take a keli that's not muksa and make it into muksa. We're going to deal with that in the Gemara. But you are allowed to do it. However, if the way you want to salvage, you want to give a solution, I don't want things to get burned. So you're going to put a keli with water under the lamp. So if a spark falls out, it's going to go in the water and it's going to be extinguished. That you can't do because you are machaba. Really, you're not extinguishing. You are causing a fire later to be extinguished. And that's why it's asur. And that will be a problem, as we'll see in a moment, that it's indirect. But you can say asur midrabanan. Indirect is asur midrabanan. So first, the Gemara is going to begin with the first part of the Mishnah, that the Mishnah allows not only on Friday, but even on Shabbos, of putting a keli under the lamp, just in case a spark flies out. The keli that you're putting is muchan. That's called heichanoi, right? Muchan is the opposite of muksa, including the whole Perek Be'ikeh that deals with muksa. This is the second part of this Perek. L'choira, when it's a base to fire, it's going to become muksa. So how are you allowed to do it? You're putting it with a kavana. That's your whole purpose of it being mekabel nitzoitz, rendering that keli, even lit up Shimon during the time that it has the spark, muksa, buses to muksa. So Amar Rav Huna, Rabbi Yeshua, this is the word that nitzoitzois ein bohem amish. That's the difference between ruchnius and gashmius. Instead, gashmius is mamashesdik. Ruchnius is not. And that's gavaldik. So when you have oil and you have a wick, that's muksa. It's a lamp. But when you have just a spark, which is what might happen, just a spark is not considered mamashas enough. We'll go with their approach, even not only because the spark will quickly go out. Even when the spark is in the keli, just a spark, the keli is not muksa. You're not being mevatel the keli meichonit, which is why you are allowed to do it, even on Shabbos. Now, in contrast, because you are machaba. Now, here's the problem. The problem is, like we spoke in the intro, that even though doing things indirectly, as a rule, causing something to happen, gram takes a malacha down from a deraisa to a derabanan, and of course, it's also midrabanan. Whenever there is a chashash that there's going to be real financial loss, the chachamim, unlike Rabbi Yossi, are matir completely. And again, the big Mishnah will be, like we mentioned, there's a fire burning. You're not allowed to put out the fire when there's no question of human life. By the way, nowadays in the cities that we live in, the houses are built so near each other, we consider every fire pikuach nefesh. We're speaking, think about it, if you live in a village and the next house is 2 miles down, and there's not a forest, there's no trees. In other words, it was normal that the house can get burned. No one has even a chashash of getting burnt. If a person is in the house and all of the living beings in the house are outside, these are the cases that we'll learn. You're not allowed to put the fire out. With all of the dinim, what could you save? What can you not save? Okay, but the fire is not by the house yet. The fire is coming towards the house. So the Mishnah there speaks about people that would build a firewall. One of the options that the Chachamim allow for people to use is that they can put barrels filled with water, even new earthenware barrels. What's the new? Because new earthenware barrels, anything new is more susceptible to breakage. Look how beautiful it is. Not the way people think. New is strong. When you buy a new car, the first couple of 1,000 miles, that's when you're in real trouble. It's until you break it in. It's got old, yashan, noishan, it can break, altiyid. But something that's already mature, brand new barrels, the first time it's exposed to heat and water, it can plots, it can crack. So and by the way, the guy wants it to crack because you don't want just to have a wall to protect the fire from going further. You want for the barrels, it's a good thing, let them crack so the water now will put out the fire. The Chachamim allow you to do it. Hold on, I know that you're not directly being machaba, but it's gram kibui. So that's the source where the Chachamim hold that since you're doing it to save your house from getting burned, you can't be machaba just for the loss, but if you're doing a drabanan, yes, they allowed you to do gram kibui. And L'choira, the Gemara now here is putting together our Mishnah, putting water under a lamp. A spark might fly in there. You want the water to be there to put it out. Gram kiboy is asur midrabanan. The Mishnah says asur. Now the Chachamim l'chu'ura would not agree with that, because since fire causes damage, they are matir even midrabanan gram kiboy. So l'chu'ura it must be that our Mishnah has to be like Rabbi Yossi, which is not the end of the world, but that's a big statement, because the rule is Rebbe. Keep on learning this. When Rebbe quotes a din and he doesn't say divrei so and so, even though we know it's a machlokes, if indeed it's subject to a machlokes, that's the way Rabbeinu HaKadosh is saying, I paskin like that opinion. So this Mishnah is a stam Mishnah. L'choyr, it only goes with Rabbi Yossi. Now, there's so many details to that. This rule, right, of machlokes v'achar kach stam, you have to know which one Rabbi mentioned first, which one he mentioned last. Okay, and where do we have that? The Amar Rabbi Yossi is the one that holds that goyrem lekiboy, even when there is financial loss, still remains also like all of the dinim of Giram. Because l'chora, if this would have followed Shitas Chachamim, you would be allowed to put water under the lamp. And our Mishnah is also speaking about on Shabbos.
So there's no risk. There's no risk. Like if it says falls in, there's like no.
There is a risk. Fire risk. That's a good call. Spark is a risk. So it counters the Gemara of it is, but I don't get the whole premise of your question was based on the understanding, which we understood correctly, that our Mishnah is speaking about Sai Erev Shabbos, Sai An Shabbos. The Gemara is now pushing back on that. Eimer the Amar Rabbi Yossi b'Shabbos. When is Rabbi Yossi machmer? Only if you're building the water, the water barrier on Shabbos. But the Erev Shabbos, even Rabbi Yossi will allow for you to put out barrels of water before Shabbos. There's no problem doing that. And therefore, what's the kasha? Like Bachal, who's the author of our Mishnah? Why does the Mishnah ask? And again, this is all based on the Havamina that our Mishnah is speaking about on Erev Shabbos. Why would it be mutar? And if you're going to tell me that our Mishnah is only speaking about Shabbos, it's also only on Shabbos, that's not true. Our Mishnah is speaking about both, and both in the Reisha and both in the Sefer. Now we got a problem. But Vatanya we learned, this is simply elaborating our Mishnah, but that means Erev Shabbos for sure you can put. What's the cool on the Mishnah is even on Shabbos. Pshita on Erev Shabbos. The Chomer of our Mishnah, I know it's also midrabanan, is may Erev Shabbos. Even on Erev Shabbos, when you light the Shabbos lich, you can't put the secondary keli under with water. Why not? Stam Mishnah Rabbi Yossi will say you can do it. If you're connecting it to that Mishnah, creating a water wall, Rabbi Yossi allows for you to build a water wall Erev Shabbos. And the Gemara has a Gavaldic answer. And the answer is like this, I'll say it by heart, that in the case of the fire burning away from my house, and I'm building a wall, if anything, if the barrels will crack, it's happening later. It's going to happen after the fire reaches the barrels, if it's going to make the barrels crack. I mean, it's going to stop the fire anyways. That's called gram, indirect, doing something now that will cause something to happen later. On Shabbos, we'll get to Erev Shabbos in a moment. On Shabbos, if I put a keli under the lamp, if punkt my mazel or shlamazel, when I'm putting the keli, if at that moment the spark is flying, that's not gram. When I'm bringing it near, when there is a fire there, it might happen. Now it makes sense, because if doing it on Shabbos might lead a person to be chayev chatos, then it makes sense. Now we'll start to learn hakanas derabanan. Don't even do it at Shabbos. If the problem on Shabbos only would have been, like we learned in the Mishnah Rabbi Yossi, gram kibu yasin midrabanan, like any din of gram, he's not matter because of you're losing money. Then if something is only yasin midrabanan, you're not going to make exeda to aser at Erev Shabbos. If you can do it at Erev Shabbos, you don't do that. But whenever there is a fear of a chayiv chatos on Shabbos, that's the case. And by the way, that's even l'Rabbanan, because even l'Rabbanan, direct kibbutz, that's the whole issue. When there's a fire burning, if there's no life danger, you cannot put the fire out. Let's read it inside. Elo Amar Ravashi, afilu teimer Rabbanan. The case, Shana Hachi, the reason, the issue of putting a keli with water under a lamp, in other words, your mamish It's mekadev means the opposite of gram. It could happen that while you're putting it, the spark flies. And when that happens, you're chayv chatas. And therefore, the Chachamim made a gzeira, don't even do it Erev Shabbos. And our Mishnah is not therefore following Rabbi Yossi. Our Mishnah is not getting into that machloikis. And for that we say, Hadran Allah Kira, God willing, we'll come back to you, Perek Akira, and to be continued. It was a short daf, but we're going to pay our dear price, God willing. So we're learning. Just to know what we're doing. That Shabbos we went back and forth. Sanhedrin, there's no back and forth. We're starting on daf Nun Ches, and wow. And by the way, for many of us who are learning Yavamas, it's mamish very much connected. We're learning about which aroyos are also Libnei Noach, and much less than the aroyos that are also Libnei Yisrael. Much less. In other words, one of the Shemim Libnei Noach, you have to. It's an easy simon to remember. It's
three big ones.
Three big, and Alawes Gimel Daled. That's the simon. The three big ones is Avodah Zarah, adultery. But what is adultery for Bnei Noach? Right, we have the 21 erves. We're going to learn in Yavamas these brises, 40 erves. How many erves? Midaraisa midarabana. There are much less relationships that are considered prohibited sexual relationships for Goyim. But we're going to have to clarify what is permitted, what's also. We're going to learn about Gadim. We're going to learn about a concept that even though on one hand the gate shenis guide kikot n'shanelo dami, so you can argue a gate can marry a sister. Just an example, because if she converted, if she didn't convert, she's not Jewish. But so we don't say that. But that's a derabbanan, because we can't allow someone that while they were goyim, that relationship was also goyim incest is also for goyim. A man cannot marry his sister by the goyim if they are related maternally. It's very interesting how it works by the goyim. By Yidden, it's sai paternal, sai maternal. If I remember correctly, we'll learn this tomorrow, that by goyim, I think it's only maternal. So theoretically, if two siblings convert, they're not considered halachically siblings. But since while they were goyim, they were asur, you can't have a scenario that a person becomes a yid, and something that used to be asur cannot become mutter. And that's more or less where we're at over there. We're going to learn about Kishu, but at least we're going straight. We're going from Daf Nun Ches until Daf Samach Zayin. We're learning exactly 10 daf. Shkoyach.